for MinLaw. So I would respectfully disagree with the ministry's view that because most of the residents who've appealed for compulsory mediation, and I've written 2 letters, are through the MP, and generally the MP will you not agree that the MP is a sufficient gatekeeper of these compulsory mediation appeals to the ministry? Second SQ, so for residents outside of Tampines, how should they currently appeal for compulsory mediation? Should they appeal to HDB to come down to their units and see the circumstances for themselves? SQ3, there's a widespread perception that the CDRT is quite toothless because even if you get an injunction, getting an enforcement order seems to be quite difficult. And I quote a Mothership article of 2024, which reported a Bukit Panjang resident who got a CDRT injunction for the neighbor to stop smoking in June 2023, but found it subsequently difficult to get the evidence to get an enforcement order when her neighbor persisted in smoking. For M&D, first SQ, so the CRU has 15 staff members, has had 6 months, 5 severe cases in 5 months, for 6 months. That means less than 1 case per month. And yet there are about 2,500 noise cases per month. So generally using the Tampines electors as a proxy for the number of cases, there should have been about 150 cases for Tampines. So less than 1% of them have been deemed severe. So my question is, what are the thresholds preventing CRU escalation? And will M&D publish the criteria so that residents and frontline officers know when a case is deemed severe? Second SQ, if no sensors were deployed, what unique capability did CRU add beyond current procedures by HDB and the police, which already mediate and investigate?
Mr. Speaker, sir, before I deal with the Honourable Member, Mr. Tiong's 3 SQs, I'll just make a clarification. I mentioned in my speech just now that Mr. Tiong asked for the number of compulsory mediations for neighbour disputes at CMC for each of the last 5 years. Actually, he asked for 3 years. So with that clarification, let me just now deal with the SQs. The first point about whether the MP can be the gatekeeper, my response is to point out that as far as the issue of directing compulsory mediation is concerned, that has to be dealt with even-handedly, and also it involves 2 institutions. One, the judge, which is an independent branch of our government, and the other one is in relation to the public officers. So we cited it with the public officers as far as compulsory mediation is concerned, so that anybody who's aggrieved, he may write, or his MP may write to the public body concerned, and then they will look at it and see whether or not there's a need to issue mediation directions. Because when MPs get information, they only hear one side of the story. It's very difficult to hear both sides of the stories, but the public officers are able to do so. At the judiciary level, as I mentioned in my speech, the judges have discretion to order directions as well. So cumulatively, we are able to deal with this matter, ensuring that mediation is really the main thrust of our approach or strategy to deal with neighbours' disputes. Now, the Honourable Member asked about compulsory mediation outside the Tampines project. So this is really something which we are looking at, and as was mentioned in the speeches made by myself and MOS Tan, we are looking to complete the pilot, learn from the issues that has presented itself, and then we certainly want to extend it to all parts of Singapore. I certainly remember the debate that happened in the last session of Parliament, where almost every member asked that his constituency be volunteered for the extension after the pilot as well. So it's a matter of resources, it'll come. Now I come to the last SQ, which is an assertion that the CDRT is toothless. Now, I'm just looking at it from the perspective of the legislative framework. the legislative framework allows for a person who breaches a special direction to be prosecuted and be convicted. And that must mean that there's some truth to the action. It's really a matter of enforcement. And may I also add that under the enhanced powers visited with the CDRT, the HDB has even the powers to evict a person from his house. In fact, there have been instances where respondents have been ordered to leave their homes for a period of 10 days and 14 days. So these measures are certainly measures with serious outcomes.
Excuse me. Sir, I thank the member Kenneth Tiong for his questions. I think there are two parts to it. One is with regards to the efficacy of the CRU and the expansion, and the second is whether the CRU has special power, In this regard, sir, I would also like to ask the member if he can 100% guarantee that any of these suite of measures, including the CRU, can de-escalate a neighbour dispute, and then I'll respond shortly.
That's a strange question. Clearly, I think you cannot 100% guarantee de-escalation, but it will make sense at the margins.
So, of course, that was a question in which we know the answer. Regardless of whatever we do, there is no 100% guarantee. You apply CDRT, CMC, or even to that regard, the CRU to any of these cases, it can help, it can also hinder. And in certain cases as well, it may even exacerbate the situation. So there is no special power that the CRU has, and so let's exercise reason. Let's exercise reason to it, and recognize that there is no tool that is perfect, and recognize that we have a useful suite of tools that are available to us thanks to the enhanced CDMF, and we are using those tools, and we are using novel tools in the Tampines pilot with regards to the CRU as well as the MD, but there is no perfect tool in this regard. And so there is no special power. But what the CRU does is help to be a intermediation in the middle between voluntary mediation as well as enforcement. And that's what it is purporting to do. At the November 2024 2R, I think many members of this House from across both aisles have naturally asked for the expansion of the CRU beyond the Tampines pilot. I understand that, and I'm no exception. In fact, I think that was one of the biggest asks across. Can I ask, and can I also request for members to understand this, that this is a pilot. We've done this for 6 months in Tampines, and it is resource intensive. We are now only 6 months into this of a 1-year pilot. There are 5 cases, and we will continue to take on severe cases in Tampines that are being floated to or raised or triaged by the agencies. But I ask for some patience. We are studying this pilot very carefully, sizing it very carefully, and where appropriate, we will expand this pilot. At this point, I also wanted to remind members that in the 2R reading last year, that Ms. Sylvia Lim had also asked for the expansion of the CRU pilot, amongst many other members in this House. But what is also very useful is that members of this House also acknowledged 2 things. One is that this is a multi-year effort by several ministries and agencies, and I thank members for duly acknowledging that. But the more important point is also that Ms. Sylvia Lim had, while asking, like many members, to expand the CRU pilot, you've also acknowledged the resource-intensive and challenging nature of the work. I quote Ms. Sylvia Lim. She said, "It is also clear that the enhanced CDMF will be a resource-intensive exercise requiring standby teams after office hours and active management of difficult cases by the new DG of Community Relations. The work will not be easy," unquote. And I thought this is just useful for us. Give us some time. Let us study the pilot. We are working very hard on learning from the 5 cases that we have in Tampines. I've given in my reply the outcomes of these CRU cases in Tampines, and we are also looking at cases outside of Tampines that some of members have also floated to us. And taken together, then we are able to then look at how best to resource this and then extend it beyond Tampines when it is appropriate.
I have 3 supplementary questions. 1, as noise disturbances and hoarding in common areas remain among the most frequent neighbour disputes in HDB estates, would the ministry consider reviewing and strengthening legislation and enforcement, including setting maximum permissible decibel levels or clearer hoarding thresholds to address these issues more proactively? 2, as the ministry explored the use of predictive analytics or risk assessment tools to identify the high-risk neighbour disputes before they escalate? And 3, if so, what safeguards are in place to ensure there is fairness, transparency, and privacy?
I'll take the first part of the question posed by the Honourable Member Dr. Choo. She suggested whether the legislation can be reviewed further to put specific noise levels. Certainly something that we can consider. I would give her and honourable members an assurance that we are continually looking to see how we can strengthen the system, because we know how important this issue about ensuring neighbourliness and harmony in the community is. But I think one must agree, the core point is that these issues must be dealt with in the community, and community must exercise self-moderation. That's really the principal point. We should not be directing cases to be dealt with at the CDRT as a first resort.
With regards to Dr. Choo's questions, I want to say that the severity of noise disturbances can vary, of course, depending on ambient noise levels. And rather than just across-the-board decibel thresholds, CRU measures noise levels above the ambient. I also wanted to assure members, and in fact, last year at the 2R reading, SMS SimAn had also assured members that there will be safeguards to protect residents' privacy in the deployment of noise sensors. I refer the member to that speech. Thank you.
I have 2 excuse for M&D. Out of the 5 cases that CRU has taken, how many of those cases are considered resolved, and how long did it take? Second question, when can we expect the ministry to decide if the CRU can be expanded to other towns? Will it be after the 1-year period pilot?
I had mentioned earlier on, going into the details of the cases, there are 5 cases. I mentioned that of the 3 cases that CRU is dealing, it's facilitate inpatient admission and treatment for 1 and more consistent follow-up in community for the other 2. SMS Murali had mentioned that CRU had issued mediation direction for 1. And then I also mentioned in my main reply, please refer to that, that the 1 case involving the deliberate use of noise to disturb neighbours and not related to mental health has abated after joint intervention by CRU, police and town council. We are studying the way in which the CRU is managing these cases, and you see that there are some encouraging signs, but just please do give us some time to study this in detail, and also cases outside of the pilot so that we can better think about resourcing it. I think we discussed this in detail last year, and I really ask for members' patience in this. Work with us. We are serious about this. We are working hard on this, and we will take all of the learnings very seriously and your feedback into account.
To improve the process, I wanted to ask whether the ministry is studying ways to further simplify or digitalize the evidence submission process for CDRT hearings to make it more accessible for laypersons.
Insofar as the point about assisting applicants in the CDRT process, certainly the judiciary has leaned forward. As I mentioned in my speech, there's a website which provides very important information on how to collate evidence. And also, I would say the CRU has been formed. The legislative intent is also to assist applicants in certain cases by also gathering evidence, and that can be presented to the CDRT, or in a very clear-cut case, the CRU itself can issue abatement orders. So collectively, this will assist the neighbour who is belaboring under some disamenities from his other neighbour.
Mr. Speaker, my grassroots leaders are really the true heroes on the ground in mediating neighbourly disputes. According to what I know on the from the Straits Times, 90% of neighbourly disputes are actually resolved at the grassroots level. So they often work late into the night on their own time to preserve the harmony between neighbours and in the community. So, two SQs. How can we enhance the ecosystem of support, including resources, so that our grassroots mediators can do their job and play this vital role before formal escalation to the suite of measures that have been mentioned? And most importantly, given the anxiety of the murder in Yishun, how can we also enhance the safety of our grassroots leaders so that they can do this work with a peace of mind as they work deep into the night? Perhaps training for some pickup of warning signs and maybe techniques to de-escalate more serious scenarios. I'd like to hear from the ministers. Thank you.
The grassroots leaders, indeed, that has also been my experience. They do it on their own time, dealing with disputes from neighbours, disputes involving neighbours, and also they take their own time to train themselves. They go through mediation courses as well. And as a result of which, a substantial number of neighbours' disputes are being solved through them. I would also add, sir, that actually there's also another aspect of what they do, which is really creating the goodwill through community activities, getting the neighbours to meet each other. I mean, this is something that we took for granted during the kampung days when our doors are always open. Here, the grassroots leaders make sure that neighbours meet each other through, say, block parties and other events for residents. And that is very helpful because with the relationship that's built, the neighbour who is originally thinking of complaining may say, hey, wait a minute, I know his circumstances, I know his family well, maybe I'll live with it. And that's the live and let live attitude that we want to promote in the community. As to the SQs on supporting the grassroots leaders, certainly we are happy to lean forward to train suitable grassroots leaders for mediation training. Mediation is not an easy area for many of them because they may not be legally trained. So, we are certainly happy to see how we can train more. In fact, at the CMC level, we are also looking out for suitable candidates to increase our core of mediators. I think that can certainly help. We can certainly continue to share best practices, and that's one way to strengthen the competence of our grassroots leaders as mediators. On the issue of the anxiety following the incident in Yishun, I would say this: if anyone feels threatened, then the first thing to do is to call the police via 999, and there's no doubt about that. Mediation is not suitable when there are signs of violence, threatened or actual. And you should break off and then let the police deal with it. And that must be something ingrained in everybody's mind. And of course, sometimes we are dealing with evolving situations, and there must be a constant assessment as to whether the line is crossed.
If I may also, just to suggest that also members please continue to support the Municipal Services Office's ongoing work in this front. MSO has a Love Our Hood Youth Challenge, and as well as HDB's Singapore's Friendly Neighbourhood Award. These are just some measures in which we can take all of these upstream. And I just wanted to also reflect that these upstream measures are complemented by what SMS Murali and I had outlined today, a comprehensive suite of measures for the enhanced CDMF. They are not panaceas, but taken together, I think we can build that reefer society that we all aspire to. Thank you.
Earlier on, when he said that the CRU officers don't have special powers, I just wanted to understand what he meant by that, because under the Act as we amended last year, they do have actually special powers, legal powers anyway, under the provisions of the bill that we passed last year. For example, they can issue orders on the spot and so on. So I wonder whether he could clarify that point, what he meant by that the CRU officers don't have special powers. The other question is that, he quoted my speech earlier about the fact that, and of course I do recognize that the work is not going to be easy, but I did say, perhaps erroneously last year, that the CRU had standby officers after office hours. I believe I was wrong on that point because it was later clarified that the CRU does not work after office hours. So I'd like him to clarify that on that point. Thank you.
Sylvia Lim is right on that second point. So clarify it. On the first point about superpowers, that wasn't my term. That wasn't my term. I think it was the member Kenneth Tiong's term. Or special powers or superpowers or, yeah. So you're absolutely right. There are a few, and I think in the 2R it has already been mentioned under different sections, new section 13E, under section 13M. These are powers that the CRU have been afforded under the bill, which was passed last year. And so I just wanted to clarify, because I did not say special powers, and that's why I wanted to make sure that it is very clear. That's why I asked the member Kenneth Tiong about what he really meant by special powers. If he meant that it would be a special antidote or panacea to resolving this, then it is not. And I think we've agreed that the CRU would not be able to do that any intervention could help, it could also hinder. So I think, just to clarify, the exchange between me and Kenneth Tiong, member Kenneth Tiong, that's what I meant. But you're spot on that there are powers afforded to the CRU as outlined by the second reading last year.
I have two SQs related to a particular step, which is the service and enforcement step of the process. You gave a lot of data on the number of cases, the number of resolutions, and I actually wanted to clarify, if you had mentioned, maybe I missed it, was there data on the proportion or number of CDRT cases that are actually enforced? So that's my first SQ. And I ask that because I hear from the ground that actually that percentage can be fairly low. And my second SQ related to that is, under the current framework, I understand that the affected neighbour who initiated the CDRT is actually the one that is responsible for service and enforcement of the orders from CDRT. In particular, and that would involve either hiring, going through a process server, or, as you said earlier, to make an application to the court. These are, of course, can be quite intimidating to the average resident. So my question is, will the government consider shifting the responsibility for service of CDRT orders to a government agency? And related to that, are CRU orders treated the same way? Do those also have to be served and enforced by the affected neighbours?
Second question first. The issue of service of the CDRT order is really a judicial matter. And I take the honourable member's points, and we will convey her feedback to the judiciary as to the modes of service of CDRT orders that should be available to the successful litigant after the CDRT hearing. Insofar as CRU orders are concerned, that's dealt with by the unit itself, so that shouldn't present an issue. And certainly the framework is really to assist the resident, because the CRU, through the enhanced legislative framework, is able to make the investigations and, in a clear-cut case, issue an abatement order. And thereafter, if it is not complied with, then it can escalate and consider enforcement. Just as I mentioned just now in response to the Honourable Member Mr. Tiong, there could be eviction orders, there can be pursuant to which the person has to leave his house, or there could also be compulsory acquisition by HDB. So these are all the measures that are available. As to the steps to be taken to enforce, or rather the figures for enforcement, my apologies, I don't have the figures offhand, but if the honourable member would like to file a PQ, I can answer that specifically.
Picking on some of the points that SMS made, I understand that 2/3 of the disputes relate to noise-related matters, and about 50% of people who are asked to go for voluntary mediation do not do so. Another 20% refuse it outright. Now, taking these points, I would like to make a suggestion to MND, which I'd actually raised in the last sitting 5 years ago, and that is a very simple solution for MND to set threshold levels on noise, educate the public on it, and then take enforcement. And I would respectfully suggest this solves several issues. It avoids the entire swathe of resources needed to decide each noise case by case in mediation, then CDRU, and then everywhere else. Instead, with a clear benchmark and enforcement, the first point of contact for most people is to call the police. If there are guidelines, they can enforce, or a suitable MND officer can enforce. I'd be grateful for MND's consideration of this.
So I responded to that similar question, and MND will take these into consideration.
Sir, can I just ask the MOS, how many neighbour dispute cases have been reported in Tampines HDB town since April 2025? I asked this in my original PQ. Given that the Community Relations Unit pilot has taken on only 5 cases in the 6 months since it started, is this the rate of referrals that can be expected for a typical HDB town? And if the CRU, which has greater expertise in handling neighbour disputes, how would it, if it never gets referred cases, how would it be able to achieve any significant success? And lastly, for the SMS for law, can you confirm that the plans are for grassroots leaders or grassroots advisors to issue mandatory mediation orders? Because if it's grassroots advisors, then I believe all but 10 of the grassroots advisors in Singapore are also MPs, which will present the same problems that the SMS mentioned in his response to Mr. Tiong.
So I don't have the numbers for Tampines, but the trend that I mentioned earlier on in my reply about the average monthly volume of neighbour noise feedback in HDB estates across Singapore over the past 5 years, which has held steady at 2,500. The trend is similar in Tampines town. Please let me get back to the member on those numbers. You mentioned earlier on about whether we could have expanded it, and what are the measures that we can take, right? Can you just respond, just repeat your question, please? Thank you.
I'm referring to the expansion within a town. So Tampines town has had 6 months to run this pilot, but it's taken out only 6 cases or 5 cases so far. Is this the rate of referrals that we can expect moving forward when it's expanded to other towns?
Inherent in that question is also a very important question that we want to ask. How many referral cases do we want to have? And how many serious cases we want to have? And I think the member would agree with me that we would ideally have less cases. Ideally. You would, because at the upstream you would have. But let me respond to this. The fact is that we are looking at all of these 5 cases. You've seen some encouraging signs within all of these different 5 cases that the CRU has already addressed. And we are studying these very carefully for us to see what we can do. I also want to take this opportunity to also say that the CRU officers, earlier on, the member Kenneth Tiong also mentioned that, you have how many different officers, and then why is it just 5 cases? These are my officers at the CRU have worked very hard on these cases. They have devoted time, and as the member would appreciate, these are very complicated cases. And that is exactly why these are severe cases that have been referred to by HDB and the police. If they are normal cases that are easily managed in the community or in CMC or other measures, then they wouldn't have been. So I wanted to just make the point that ideally we would address many of these cases upstream. But where there are severe cases downstream, that's where the pilot has shown us some ways in which to deal with it in concert with and augmented by the suite of CDMF measures that are already there. So I really wanted to thank my public officers because in this regard, they work incredibly hard and spend incredible amount of times in the 5 cases in Tampines. And as I mentioned to them that we are open to taking on even more cases that have been severe cases, to be precise, that have been escalated to us by police and HDB.
I'd like to clarify that there are absolutely no plans to vest with grassroots leaders or advisors with the power to issue mediation directions. As I explained in my speech, these powers be vested in public officers.
One supplementary question for MOS. I understand there are considerations to extend the CRU framework to beyond Tampines to other towns if the pilot is successful. I just want to seek clarification whether this plan also includes private estates like condominiums and private apartments, because I'm not just concerned about my HDB residents, I'm also concerned about my private estate residents.
I have a majority of private residents in my constituency as well, and the pilot is meant to inform. We're focused on Tampines Town now as a pilot, and after getting all of the feedback and all of the learnings from it, the plan is to extend it to other towns, including where there are private estates.
I understand HDB will consider compulsory acquisition of flats by severe and recalcitrant nuisance makers. The constant distress caused by noise transmission is a root cause of many disputes that escalate, including pickleball. And I'm glad to hear that new BTO developments now feature increased floor slab thickness. To ensure we address the structural root issue, can the Minister clarify whether they will commit to immediately implementing a mandatory logging and tracking system, and with which agency, to monitor all dispute cases that are reported to involve threats of physical violence in order to identify and flag these recalcitrant offenders, or even consider providing equipment like industrial-grade sound monitoring for rental. My second question is, given the limited scope for major infrastructure changes in existing flats, will the Ministry consider exploring subsidized soundproofing improvements or technology as a specific upgrade option under future home improvement programs for blocks that have high persistent record of noise-related disputes?
On the first one, on the mandatory logging and tracking system, and then the second one on the subsidized soundproofing, I think this require, again, resources and as well as careful learning. And I think, pilots and others, even beyond Tampines, we will look into these, and then if relevant or appropriate, we'll consider them. Thank you.
It's about interagency coordination. So when neighbour disputes turn violent, how do we better capture the warning signs, such as repeated police calls, past mediation cases, town council complaints? And can the Ministry work with the police, HDB, town council, MOH, perhaps to set up an early warning system so that when multiple reports come in from various agencies about the same household, agencies can act decisively before tensions boil over? And is the current data sharing between CMC, CDRT, SPF really robust enough to flag dangers early?
Certainly, I'm aware that there's a level of cooperation between the agencies. I think he's looking towards a proper framework so that we can better detect cases which may become violent. It's certainly something that we can consider. Sir, while I'm on my feet, may I also state that my colleagues have given me the statistics for the enforcement orders, a question that Honourable Member Ms. Mariam Jaafar asked for. So in the past 5 years, there are 24 special directions issued and 2 exclusion orders issued.
One question for MND's consideration. So I think a lot of the focus has been on the mental health of the neighbours that have potentially been causing a lot of these nuisances. But I also have cases where the mental health of the neighbours on the receiving end have been very badly affected, and I wonder if this could be a consideration in terms of the severity criteria for MND to step in and activate CRU.
I mentioned earlier on that some of the criteria we had, or how does the CRU take on these cases? I mentioned earlier on about severe cases with regards to a nexus of mental health conditions, as well as prolonged and unreasonable interference. There are also in the 2R some details about what criteria we're looking at, but as I mentioned earlier on, let's look at the cases, let's study the pilot, which is again only 6 months old, and then take in your feedback and apply as appropriately. I also wanted to get back to Member Gerald Giam for his question about Tampines, if you don't mind. First is that since April 2025, there's been 160 feedback per month in Tampines.
I just have a question for the SMS. I heard in his reply that MinLaw is planning to work with HDB and MND to refer more cases for directed mediation. So if the SMS could share in more concrete detail how the ministry plans to get more cases referred for directed mediation, because I do agree with the SMS that this must be one of the centers of gravity for CDMF framework going forward.
Can I say that quite clearly, not all cases, as I mentioned in my speech, are cases which should go for formal mediation. The idea, and I could take the opportunity to reiterate the framework, is to settle the bulk of disputes in the community itself. And that's really using the resources that the Honourable Member Mr. Chee Meng said, our grassroots leaders, community leaders. So that's the bulwark of the cases that we would have to deal with. Beyond that, there needs to be an assessment made by the public officers, HDB, CRU, to see whether or not these are the cases where it may make sense for the issuance of the formal mediation direction. So again, one has to look at the context. In a situation where the CRU is of the view that the case is made out straight away, it's a straightforward case made out, they may not even bother the residents to go for mediation. They can issue an abatement order. So that's not necessary for them to go through the entire process. And in situations where they feel that there is no troublesome signs like threat of violence and all that, that's the situation where the legislative policy contemplates the issuance of the MD. And I guess as we gather more experience from the pilot, we will fine-tune the protocols and make sure that the aim behind this CDMF, which is really to ensure that our community self-moderates when it comes to the dealing of disputes, ensure that as far as possible, we don't invoke the formal processes, which also includes the MD, so that neighbors not only can live and let live, but also continue on in the spirit that we would want them to see.